and welcome to episode 31 of our SAP on Microsoft Azure video podcast. Today is March 5th, and together with Goran and Robert, we're here to talk about anything related to SAP and Microsoft. Hello, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
Today we talk principal propagation, and we will have Martin Räpple walk us through a full end-to-end single sign-on enabled flow from Microsoft Teams to your SAP system on-prem. But before we switch over to him, let's take a look at this week. And actually, this week was Ignite 2021, so there are quite a few new announcements there. What I want to start with is this book of news. So similar like with the previous Ignite sessions, there's one consolidated long list. So you can see here there's really a lot of announcements there in this book of news, which basically covers, I think, most of the announcements that happened during these 2 days of Ignite 21. Yeah, we have picked a few topics there already, but Robert, do you also want to highlight a few things that caught your eyes?
There's many use in respect, for example, for network and storage. There's also, for example, on-demand capacity reservation is coming in for virtual machines in Azure. So this is currently in preview. You will talk about later about new M-series version. What is interesting, we already discussed about this Azure Premium Disk and Zone Redundant Storage. This is now in preview. This is also coming. This will probably simplify also and reflect to SAP landscapes. Then there's a performance tiers changes in Azure Premium. That mean I can have the same size but change the performance. There's we had that for our Premium Disk till P30. Now we have on demand for P30 and more. So I think you can go till 30,000 IOPS and 1,000 megabit per second dynamically, and you can. I mean, this is there's some changes, very interesting changes are coming in that direction. What is also interesting, for example, there's an Azure migration program. This is our new program, not just for partner. This is also for customer. I mean, we are going together with partner to simplify our data center migrations and all the stuff what we already had now in actually extension in new program where we are covering a little bit more than just classical data center migrations. And there's also, I mean, I like the section around networking because we now have Azure routing server is general availability. It's very interesting. I will suggest to a little bit dive into it. Express route IP6 support is there. And many other stuff which are very interesting for networking perspective. I mean, I really suggest to read that this overview and just go deeply about some section inside, because there's a really interesting changes, and I think it's somehow you have a feeling that we are, from our perspective, we are going really in good direction from networking perspective, storage, and filling our gaps, and trying to answer all the requests for customer or customer complaints. I like it. It's very, and of course, before that, you will probably talk about the Russinovich video session.
Exactly, and I mean you're absolutely right, and there's so much content in this book of news that I think it's probably best to read through it. I have to admit I didn't read through all of it. What I did is I watched a few videos and a few related blogs, and the first blog that I wanted to highlight is about this Microsoft Mesh. So if you saw the keynote from Satya, and then later on also from Kip, I forgot his name, but he had this keynote session which was completely virtual, where you had where he was wearing a HoloLens, and he was basically introducing this Microsoft Mesh framework, I think.
On the stage.
It's on stage, exactly. And apparently, if you had a VR headset or something like that, you could also really participate there from a VR perspective. I don't have a headset yet, but I'm pretty sure this must have been pretty cool. So this mesh thing is really something that brings a lot of different components together, I would say. So there's a mesh SDK that allows you to develop mesh application. There are different services like these spatial maps or anchors and stuff like that that allow you to really place objects somewhere. Then there's this whole collaboration community approach where you can really interact with different peoples or persons. And I think then the other interesting thing is it's really cross devices. So you don't need to have a HoloLens. You can also have this with other VR headsets, or you can also do this on your tablet or something like that, or even on your PC, two-dimensional. So I think here you can see really there are multiple devices available. So I think this is an interesting concept, and for example, I definitely see there's also a possibility for an SAP integration. If you plan your warehouse or if you load a truck or something like that, just think of there an SAP integration. So I think that's an interesting announcement that was made by Microsoft here. But then if we go to some of the sessions, I found this session from Erin Chappell really interesting. She actually covers some of the things that you mentioned,
exactly,
Robert. But I mean, it's only a 30-minute session, so it's very condensed. And similar like Mark Russinovich here,
which is not condensed.
No, well, but still, I still think Mark Russinovich always puts a lot of stuff in his sessions. Yeah. And what I love about his sessions is there's some old stuff or some stuff that is available today, but he also talks about very new stuff. So I mean, he was talking about these 24 terabyte virtual machines that are available, or that soon will be available. But then he also talked about DNA synthesis. So really to store data in a DNA, which I found was really interesting. But apparently it is already working. I mean, this is still a research project, but it shows that there are some really cool things also happening in the research area at Microsoft.
Yeah, I mean we are excited to talk about all those science fiction edge scenarios, but I mean in his talk there's also some very interesting scenarios which are much more on the surface. Yeah, like what we are planning around network, how to simplify this, for example, network security group management and all that stuff. There's a very interesting presentations, part of the presentation from Mark, where he's talking about what is our future steps, not just in far future or near future, but really what we are planning for next period.
And I think this time this is also a 1.5 hour session, so it's much longer than his usual sessions, I thought, but it's definitely worth watching, I would say.
Can you scroll a bit down?
Sure.
Below, so there is an exactly, stop it, below the picture, AI capturing language supported. I just noticed, really funny. But, so meaning we are, I don't know if we can.
Have you checked it out?
I haven't tried, but it seems that you can choose the language to
Japanese, for example, your program
translate. The underlying. Funny.
Yeah. I don't know. We need to give it a try.
Yeah.
So the next session, Donovan Brown also had a 30-minute sessions around development, where he really talks about the whole development flow, starting with Visual Studio Code, talking obviously about GitHub, using different Azure services. And I mean, I really like the way how Donovan presents his stuff. So I think if you are looking at developing applications on Azure, I think his session was also really, really interesting and certainly worth the 30 minutes here. Then I think we talked about Bicep in the past already, and Brendan Burns has a nice session there. Together with Alex. Alex is doing some demos and really showing actually how Bicep works. But the idea here is really to have an abstraction layer for ARM templates. So when you start writing or creating ARM templates, this can be sometimes a little complicated. And what Bicep does is it's basically abstracting the complexity to some extent from ARM templates, and allows you to create then infrastructure or resources on Azure that you write in Bicep, and then this is translated into ARM, which I thought is also really interesting. This is the 0.3 release, but apparently it is production ready. So I think that's also an interesting 30 minutes that you might be able to spend. Then along these lines, and Robert, you mentioned it already, we announced public preview of a new type of M series. So this time, I mean, you know, there are these certified, there's this huge range of certified virtual machines from SAP where you're allowed to install SAP workload on, or where you actually get support when running your SAP systems on these virtual machines. And now we are adding additional virtual machines to this range, and this time it's based on Cascade Lake with 20% performance increase. So you get all the information down here. I think it's just good. There were customers asking for these newer ranges of CPU and memory. So I think it's good that we are adding additional functionality to give basically customers more flexibility on what kind of memory sizes and virtual machines.
I mean, one important aspect here is also these are the Gen 2 VMs, which means you can resize them to the MV2. So if you have an MV1, which is Gen 1, you can resize to Gen 2 image, meaning in MV2.
Only Gen 2 or both Gen 1 and Gen 2?
I think he mentioned here it's only Gen 2.
Okay.
I believe that he mentioned in the blog, just need to double check that's only a Gen 2. Although MV1, the previous version can be also deployed in those version 1 also as a Gen 2 image.
But that means if I have Gen 1, if I have a first version of Gen 1, I cannot actually migrate that. I need to do physical migration.
You need to do, let's say, database migration method, exactly, which is a bit troublesome, of course, if you need to upsize, let's say, your stuff. So it's always really recommended, whatever is done on these M series, definitely immediately to go to MV2. So you're basically, even if it's a lower size, because potentially later going upwards to the MV2, it's just a matter of resizing.
And pricing is already available, so you can already today execute the sizing based on the price. The difference, by the way, between this class is a little bit, let's say, not so clear name. What does this class mean? But it's actually, this class mean there's not temp drive on that. This is the only difference, I think, between those two family. One is with temp drive and another is without.
That's this one little letter here. But I think this is also obviously available, or this mechanism that we have, temporary storage, is also available also with other virtual machines. So I think this is just, some customers like this to have temporal storage, to have the local disk there, and others don't. So I think that's just a good way to provide flexibility again.
Great.
Good. Then I want to change a little. So there were obviously a lot of Power Platform announcements also.
Surprise, Holder and Power Platform.
Yes. No, and Charles Lamanna, he's providing really a good overview of some of the new features that were released with the Power Platform, because I think it's, I mean, almost similar like with Teams. There's so much new stuff coming out, and I think one of the highlights there was, first of all, this new language, PowerFX. So basically, the idea is if you know how to write formulas in Excel, so you know if you do some equals, VLOOKUP or whatever that you have in Excel, the idea is you can do the same thing also in Power Platform now. So you don't need to know JavaScript or C# or whatever, but it's really the idea that PowerFX should be as intuitive and adaptive to this low-code logic that you are also used from Excel. So I think that's
and it's open source.
And it's open source. Yes, exactly. That's also very interesting. Yeah, that was also.
It's not your father's Microsoft, right?
No, exactly, absolutely,
Yes.
and this is really this openness. Let others contribute and validate. I think that's really nice. And yeah, I mean I haven't played yet with PowerFX myself, but I think this sounds definitely very interesting. The other really interesting for me thing was Power Automate Desktop. So I think we talked about this in the past. This is basically a tool that you can install and that allows you to automate clicks on your own desktop. And now Power Automate Desktop is free. So if you're a Windows 10 user, so even if you don't want to integrate it in Power Automate or in Power Flow or something like that, or Power Apps, but if you just want to automate certain tasks on your desktop, then yeah, with Power Automate Desktop, you can now do this for free. And there's actually a nice video that talks about this, how you can automate sending an email and getting some data from an Excel file and stuff like that. But they also show, for example, how you can automate your SAP GUI. And although I still think going via an API or via an OData service or going via a BAPI and yeah, do things on your SAP system is certainly the preferred way. I think sometimes it is much easier to do this by just going to the SAP GUI, recording the steps, recording the transactions that you enter, then making some complex adjustments or filling out some fields there, and then having the processes being executed in the SAP system. And now with Power Automate Desktop, well, this is free of charge and you can just use it. So I think that's also some really interesting things that are happening here.
Finally brings some intelligence in SAP GUI.
Yes. Okay, good. Next thing. Goran, I think you found or saw this blog update from Cameron again.
Cameron is a veteran on SAP and Microsoft, I would say, and he writes very nice summary. So basically updates he's doing maybe quarterly or half a year. So he started just I mean, what's there new on the documentation? You know, there's a lot of stuff if you would just go a little bit down. This is interesting. A new Azure monitoring agent is basically, I mean, SAP prerequisite for the supported stuff is to install so-called SAP extended monitoring agent, which would actually collect the information from the below of the infrastructure and some metrics as well. A bit trouble I know that in the past was for some information like about the VM size, and those they are kind of very statical. So if you install it, it will show you, and then if you resize the VM, you need to update it again. You know, so they were a bit statical, and here they are pulling directly from the Azure, so meaning they are kind of up to date. So that's really nice. He also put it here in the third part, tuning on SIOS. So I think he also mentioned me. Thanks for Goran for contribution.
Yes.
We had some challenges, let me say, with the third-party SIOS on central services. It boils down really a lot of is doing about setting a proper timeouts, you know, which is unfortunately not from the SIOS documented, but customer can use this, right? And that really solved the issues. He then listing also different blocks, which we are also kind of mentioning in the past. Talking about SQL Server 2019 distribution name, interesting part. Again, mentioning from Ralph Oracle on Azure NetApp blog, on /15 SP2, so remove mount option. And again, also that's interesting, support metrics update, about the new OS releases. And a little bit, I think he's talking about the VM guest OS throttling counter. That's always very interesting topic about the storage and how those throttling works. We don't have to go into details, but people are really warmly welcome to double check. A lot of information. So it's always nice summary. Yeah.
Cool. And everything related here, SAP on Azure general update.
Exactly. Yeah.
Perfect. So maybe along these lines then, I only saw this this white paper just recently, but now there's this white paper that talks about CONA, so Coca-Cola North America. I think we touched on them in the past already when we're talking about ANF and the whole scale out scenarios there. And now there's a related white paper that outlines what was done and how it was done. So I think that's also quite interesting to watch. So with all these announcements from Ignite and I mean, there's so much news coming in. I just wanted to highlight again, there is also an update site, an Azure update site, which basically collects all the Azure related updates. And obviously now because of Ignite, there is a lot of stuff happening here. There's a lot of new announcements, but even outside of Ignite, if you go here, then this can be a beautiful source of information on how to actually, or to see what's actually happening on the Azure side. So I think also definitely worth to bookmark and to monitor from time to time. Good. With this, let's switch sides. There's one blog post or one news that was delivered from the SAP side from Jürgen Müller and Thomas Sauer-Essig. Remember, I think last year they talked about that integration is key. Integration is really something that is super important for SAP, where they need to deliver, where it's obviously all about integrating success factors into the other SAP systems, making sure that Ariba connects well and so on. And this is basically an update on where SAP is. They also released an ebook or a paper listing out what things have happened, what solutions are already integrated. And for me, obviously, it's also interesting to see that it's not only here about the SAP solutions, so really making sure that SAP solutions are well integrated, but it's also then here about the third-party solutions. And obviously, if you look at, for example, what we just talked about with the Power Platform, I mean, I'm working with quite a few customers now that are actively looking at integrating the Power Platform into an SAP system. And obviously there we are talking at how can we best integrate or connect to an SAP system then and work with the data from the Power Platform via different connectivity channels, via an SAP API management, via the Cloud Platform integration services and so on. So I think it's really good to see that SAP is still working on these integration topics, and obviously also here for third-party customers or third-party solutions, also good to see that there are ways to connect to an SAP system. Okay, so with this, I think quite a lot of news, quite a lot of Microsoft news this week, but in the recent month, actually, Martin Räpple had created some beautiful blogs, and I think we talked already about part 1 and part 2 of his blogs, where he goes into details of how to have a single sign-on experience from the Microsoft side to the SAP side. And he just recently released his part 3, where he's now really creating an end-to-end scenario using Teams and then connecting to the SAP system. But instead of me talking about this, maybe let's now hand it over to you, Martin. Maybe you can quickly introduce yourself, and then I'm looking forward, obviously, to seeing your demo, to see the scenario in action.
Thank you, Holger. Thanks for the warm welcome and introduction. Let me maybe share my screen. So my name is Martin Räpple. I'm also in the role of a cloud solution architect here at Microsoft, and in that role, I'm focusing a little bit on such wonderful integration scenarios between, such as the one I'm showing today, like so between Microsoft Azure and SAP Cloud Platform. With maybe also a special focus on security related topics, such as managing identities across both platforms, and also looking into deeper or more advanced scenarios that are related to the topic of principal propagation. And that's actually the focus of my demo today, that I would like to give you some insights how to how to enable so-called principal propagation and what that exactly means. I will talk about that in a minute, between a solution that spans across Microsoft Azure, uses services on Azure side, and also consumes or integrates services from the SAP Cloud Platform, and even all the way to an SAP backend system that's connected to SAP Cloud Platform. So
Business Technology Platform.
Yeah, or now Business Technology Platform, exactly. Yeah, so maybe a little bit also my background. So I before I joined Microsoft, I spent quite a number of years at SAP in the SAP Cloud Platform, which is now rebranded or renamed to Business Technology Platform. So I also have some depth here. So what about principal propagation? So what's the meaning of principal propagation? Actually, that term is let's say heavily used in used in many of the SAP documentation, and there are also synonyms that on the Microsoft side it's sometimes referred to as silent authentication. I also heard like back-channel single sign-on. So those are, for me at least, all synonyms to this terminology of principal propagation. So what does it mean? It simply means that you want to take an existing authentication context, an authenticated user, the principal, and you want to securely propagate that authentication context across downstream API calls, and those may span across different systems and may even go across different cloud platforms. Yeah. So and the main objective here is that you propagate this authenticated user so that in the receiving system this security context can be reused. So the login of that user applies also to the receiving system where this principle is being propagated. And from an end user perspective, you definitely want to avoid that you prompt the user again with, for example, a login screen that asks the user for the credentials in that target system. So this is quite important for many scenarios where you where the architecture of the solution spans across different systems, and in our case here even different platforms, and where you only want to prompt the user for an initial login. And from that point on, the user context should be securely and silently propagated across all of the systems that are connected to this initial application or system where the user initially logged in. Yeah. So that's the whole story about principal propagation. And let's put that in the context of the demo scenario that I would like to show you today. So it's quite a simple scenario from an end user perspective. So the end user logs in Teams and makes use of a chatbot in Teams that should allow the user to purchase equipment for their work environment. And to enable the user to do so within Teams, there is a chatbot deployed in Teams that allows the user to simply type in the unique identifier or product description of the product that the user is looking for. However, that data of the overall product catalog for the user is stored in an SAP system. Yeah, and that system resides in the corporate network of our fictitious company here. So the challenge here is that, first of all, you want to search for the product data that the user is looking for in Teams all the way. So you have to execute this search operation on the backend system. So you have to cross cloud and even network and cloud boundaries here. Second, the user has only access to certain product categories in the backend system. So the user can't shop any category in the backend system, but only specific categories of products. So in other words, when the search is executed, the search results should only show products from those categories that the user has access to. And that brings us back to this initial requirement that we just talked about in the context of principal propagation. So we want to make sure that this search operation in the backend system is executed under the logged-in user in Teams. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And for that reason, what we do in this scenario here is we ask certainly the user initially authenticates in Teams, and then we securely propagates that authentication context, this principle. So we securely propagate that to SAP Cloud Platform, and there we make use of SAP Cloud Platform integration as a service to integrate with the backend system. So we have a very simple process here, but this process actually could be even enriched with fetching some other data that might be relevant in the search results. But for now, this process is quite simple. So we pass on the product ID that was entered by the user in Teams in the chatbot. We pass that on with a call to the backend system, and in the backend system we apply standard authorization rules in the backend system using standard authorization objects that configure a role applied to the user that uses authorization objects to reduce the number or specify the product categories the user has or should have access to. In order to make a secure connection between the SAP backend system and SAP Cloud Platform, the SAP Cloud Connector is used. So in that overall end-to-end process requires certainly some configuration, and also certainly, as you can imagine, since we cross here not only system and network boundaries, but also technology boundaries. So we call from Azure and make a call to SAP Cloud Platform. The use of common technology standards is super important here. So in other words, you won't be able to propagate the user securely if Microsoft and SAP wouldn't follow here common technology standards. And the most important one to mention here is the so-called security assertion markup language profile for OAuth. So, or short, the OAuth SAML 2 bearer grant type. So that's all specified by an RFC in the Internet Engineering Task Force. And the high-level flow that is used here to propagate the authenticated user from Azure AD or from Azure all the way to the SAP system is shown here. So in the very first step, the user authenticates at Microsoft Teams. And with that authentication, Teams, or actually the bot that runs in Teams, can call Azure AD to exchange this initial OAuth access token into a so-called SAML assertion. The SAML assertion, SAML stands for the Security Assertion Markup Language, a quite mature and in the meantime even quite old standard. But that is widely used and adopted by many vendors, including SAP and Microsoft. And that's also kind of the glue that we use here to bridge or to build such an interoperable principal propagation scenario here, because that SAML assertion issued in step number 2 on this picture, that can be used to send it to SAP, to an authorization, an OAuth authorization server on the SAP side, and that could be the OAuth server in an SAP gateway system. That could also be the OAuth server in SAP Cloud Platform. So both will accept, based on a trust relationship established between Azure AD and the SAP platform, to accept that SAML assertion and issue an access token, an OAuth access token associated with the ID that was handed in with that SAML assertion. And with that access, with that OAuth access token returned in step number 3, our bot in our scenario can actually make then the call to an OData service exposed by the SAP system to, in our case here, in our scenario, in our specific scenario here, to fetch that product data for the user. And with that call and with passing that access token issued to the logged in user in Azure AD, any existing permissions and authorizations given to that backend user are applied. Yeah. So in other words, we make this call on behalf of the authenticated user and not on behalf of, let's say, like a technical user or a system that may have a much broader, or that may typically have much broader permissions and authorizations in the backend system. Yeah. So also from an audit perspective, this is often in those scenarios quite important that on the backend system you can always audit any access made by the user based on the named user and not on a technical user. Yeah. So typically also security people are very keen on getting this aspect implemented. Yeah.
Perfect.
All right.
Yeah, and I think also from a licensing perspective on the SAP side, this is also much clearer, because then you have one user on Teams and one user on the SAP side. So you really have this one-to-one user mapping, which exactly. I think is sometimes a discussion when you obviously have this technical user, but then obviously the whole monitoring, logging, auditing, is all really relevant here.
Yeah. So I don't want to scare you now with another even more detailed architectural picture, but so just again before we go into the demo. So the steps are essentially, so I as a user will log into Teams and will get a session in Teams. I use this session to get an access token for the bot that and that already happens with a single sign-on feature in Teams. So I can, without any further prompting of the user, I can get an access token issued to the bot that runs in Teams, and with that access token returned to my bot. I do this exchange with Azure AD to exchange the access token into that SAML assertion. That SAML assertion is sent in step number 5 to SAP Cloud Platform, to the OAuth service in SAP Cloud Platform. That's the Access UAA service that is used here as a to exchange that SAML assertion into another access token now issued by SAP, because probably also worth mentioning, you just can't use this access token, this initial access token issued by Azure AD, and just send it to SAP. SAP will reject that because it has not been issued by SAP. So what we need is an access token from SAP. Then we use that in step number 6 to call our our SAP Cloud Platform integration process, which then makes use of a destination that's configured for principal propagation to pass that access token to our Cloud Connector instance on the on-premise network, and the last mile to the SAP system is done by the SAP Cloud Connector, and it translates the job token into a short-lived X509 certificate, a client certificate that still carries as the common name in the certificate the user's email address. And by the way, that's also important to understand for such a scenario. You have to find a common denominator between the Azure AD and the user in Azure AD and the user in SAP. And for many of the scenarios that I was looking into so far, like the email address is often used here, because the email address is typically this common identifier, because the user might have a completely different SAP username, and the user principal name in Azure AD is also typically not exactly the one that the user has in SAP. So user mapping often in such scenarios is also not that simple task to solve. All right, let's jump into the demo.
Cool, perfect.
Okay, so let me show you quickly what I have configured in Azure AD. So in order to make that SAML to get the SAML assertion in Azure AD, what we need is an enterprise application that is registered for our SAP Cloud Platform account. This is what I've done here, and in the SAML settings of that enterprise application, so this is of type SAP Cloud Platform. So I registered an enterprise application for SAP Cloud Platform. I imported the metadata, the SAML metadata for this of my SAP trial account, which we will take a look in a second. And probably the most important piece to mention here in the configuration of the SAML settings here is that what I do is I fetch from Azure AD the user's email address and put that as the so-called name identifier in the SAML assertion. Yeah? So that goes back to what I just explained in the overview diagram, that the email address is used here as the common denominator between Cloud Platform and Azure. So all of that requires to establish a trust relationship between SAP Cloud Platform and Azure AD, and that's done in Cloud Platform in the security settings. So I just switched back to the recently renamed Cloud Platform Cockpit, which is now the SAP BTP Cockpit, and in that Business Technology Platform Cockpit, I have established trust relationship to a number of identity providers. One of them is my Azure AD instance. That is essentially this line here. So that's the trust relationship. Without that trust relationship, SAP Cloud Platform would reject that SAML assertion because it would say like, okay, it doesn't come from a trustworthy issuer. So you need to establish that trust relationship. And finally, let's take a quick look into the Cloud Platform integration process. So that's the process I have designed here. Okay, let me quickly refresh my session. That's the process that then finally takes the request for the product identifier and passes it on to the backend system. And this is the process. Yeah, so really simple, but the important step is the one here where the call is made to the OData service, and in the connection settings of this request, you see that the authentication is configured here for principal propagation. Yeah, so that passes on the access token issued by SAP all the way to the cloud connector. And finally, the cloud connector then is configured to also for principal propagation to the actual backend system. So the cloud connector is now connected to a local SAP system I'm running here on in my demo environment. And all right, here we go. So the cloud connector is connected to my trial account, and in the backend system configuration, I am also connected here to my backend system, and I have set up principal propagation to forward the JOT token and pass that on to or transform that into a short-lived X509 certificate, and the rule is quite simple. So it takes the name out of the JOT token and generates an X509 certificate with that simple subject pattern here. So common name equals the name received out of the JOT token, and remember that common name becomes here the email address of the user. Yeah. So in other words, we need to find a user in the backend system that has as the email address that that is known under that email address. And if I go into my backend system, so here in the cert rules, I have specified mapping to map essentially the common name found in the certificates received from the cloud connector and log in that user with the email address found for that user. Yeah, so that's the end-to-end chain. And with that, let's try that out. So I'm logged in as user to my Azure AD. So I've already launched Teams. I'm logged in here as user Megan Bone. Yeah, and now Megan heard from her CTO that there's a cool new app for searching for products and buying products. So she finds that bot in the catalog of Teams. So she's quite interested in finding out what that bot can do for her. So she now adds it to her Teams environment. And the bot welcomes her and says, okay, type anything to get single sign on. Let's do that.
Hello.
Hello, hello bot. So, and now actually the first single sign on step already happened, right? So, so Teams took the existing session in Teams, so that login that I'm here as the user, and ask Azure AD to issue an access token for that product search bot. And we can look at that access token here in that bot. So it's, it's encoded in base64 format, but we can even see how that looks. How that token looks decoded so that we see a little bit more of the details in that token. So I just copy pasted that token. As you can see, it's issued to our user Megan Bone, and the important so the unique identifier or the login name of the user is her email address. Yeah. So now let's see if we can search. Now the bot asks me which product I am looking for, and so I know one of the names of the notebook products. So let's see if I can find the product in the catalog. So I say HT1000, and let's see.
Now it needs to connect via the SAP Cloud, the Business Technology Platform,
yes,
via the Cloud Connector to your SAP system.
Yes, and I hope I will get an answer soon, but maybe my system is a little bit busy.
Fall asleep again, probably.
Yeah. Okay, so, okay, finally it answers. So it says, sorry, no products found. So the reason for that is that my user, Megan Bone, has currently no access to the product category notebooks. But let's now prove that there is really an end-to-end user propagation happening by adding the notebooks category in the backend system to my user Megan Bone, and see if we repeat the search. If we repeat the search for the same product, that we will see the product data. Okay. So
basically what you've done right now, the product in the SAP system has certain permissions around this, and right now the user Megan doesn't have permissions to retrieve this specific product.
Exactly. So let's go into our backend system. And let's see for user Megan Bone what she is allowed to do. So let's see. So that's her user. And by the way, so Megan was found because she's also in that in the backend system. Her email address is set to exactly the email that is, that's the common identifier between Azure and the backend user. Yeah.
So even although her username in the SAP system is M Bowen, which obviously does not relate to the Azure Active Directory, but because the email address is the same, that's how the whole lookup works. Perfect.
Exactly. So now let's take a look at her role. So she's obviously assigned to one role that we call product search role. So let's take a look into that product search role. So we open the role maintenance, and let's take a closer look into the authorization objects assigned to that role. And let's already go into an edit mode here. So now we go deep into the authorization management of our backend system. And so actually she has two authorization objects assigned in that role. The first one allows her to call our this OData service. Yeah, so that's the first authorization given here. And the second one that exactly goes to the her authorizations in the product category or in the product catalog. And as you can see, she is only in the PD category field of that authorization object. S_EPM_PD is only assigned to flat screen monitors. So let's see if we change that and add here the notebooks category. Yeah, so we could even add like more categories. So that allows us here this value help, then gives us all the categories known for the product category in that. But I think it should be sufficient now to just change that or add a notebook. So let's save that and regenerate the profiles and exit. All right, so now that we have changed or added the notebook category, let's go back to our scenario and invoke our, hello again, our product. So, okay, now let's again look at the token, but now let's see if our changes in the backend system had any effect. So let's search again for HT1000 and voila. Now that we see, so this is actually the category here shown in that adaptive card in the bot, that now we see the result, and she could even now order it. No, not really. So that's not implemented. Yeah. By the way, talking about code and talking about implementation. So I definitely suggest to try that at home. So yeah, if you are interested in having a more closer look at also at the underlying code of that bot, there is, as Holger mentioned, there are a number of blogs that I have recently published, and the last one just last week around this whole scenario. So if you, as I said, if you want to try that at home, there is a detailed description. Also, how the backend system is configured using CDS views and DCL language here to enforce the authorization on that OData service. There is a Git repository that contains all of the code for the bot and also the CDS view and the DCL for the backend system. So, and what follows then is like a really step-by-step guide to implement this whole scenario. I should also mention that before you jump directly to this third part of the blog series, you should actually look into the first and second part, because that starts with the underlying configuration on both sides to establish the trust, etc. So the third part here that I just published last week, that and adds the application on top of all of what needs to be done in to connect Azure and SCP and the backend system. Yes, and with Perfect. That, thanks for your time.
No, thank you, Martin. And I think what I really loved about your demo was this when you first tried to access the product information and you got the error message or the permission error, so to say, and then after changing it in the backend system, then it worked. And I think that is really super powerful, because it shows if we would have done this just with a technical user, with a username for all the end users, this would not, or very complicated, be possible. You would need to implement additional logic on the SAP side, which you probably don't want to do, or on the other side. So I think this really shows in a very powerful way how important this end-to-end single sign-on is. And obviously with your blog, you really have. I mean, I have completed part 2 of your blog, so I still need to do part 3. But this really shows in a beautiful way how you can set up everything in your own systems, how you can do this in your own environment, and really see how easy it is. I mean, yes, you need to call some services to do the whole token exchange and stuff like that.
Yep.
But then it's fairly simple once you understand the flow, and I think you explained this extremely well.
Thank you, Holger. Thanks so much.
Martin, one question.
Yeah, sure.
So I mean, when you exactly what Holger mentioned, your error and your changing error. So one question in that direction, maybe a silly question, but is there any way in any standards like SAML or whatever to somehow map this claim from one identity to another identity so that you don't need to change that? Is there something like that?
So actually, the OAuth tokens that we use here can contain certain claims of the user. So we could even transfer authorizations given to the user in Azure AD all the way to the backend system. Yeah, so that could even also be possible. Yeah. But in this scenario, actually, so what we try to achieve here, I think, is really to keep the authorization management of the users in the backend, where they typically, we all know that our joint customers and SAP customers invested like tons of years sometimes into the authorization. Magic in their backend systems. Yeah, so they really, I think, invested really heavily in this. Yeah, and this is and with this approach, what we achieve is you can keep those investments into all of your authorization configuration that you made over the years.
It's absolutely okay, because I'm just asking, is there something like that, because I was not sure that.
So in general, these tokens that we used here, those credentials that were used here in the exchange, like this access token in OAuth or the SAML assertion, so both allow you to also carry not just identity or authentication information, such as the username, but also in SAML its attributes, in an OAuth access token its scopes. But those scopes or attributes can be used, not necessarily must be used for authorization purposes, but can certainly be used to express certain authorizations given to the user. So that's definitely supported.
Okay, thank you.
All right, cool. And Holger, just coming back to the point you made earlier with the so this example here and also the Git repository that I referenced in my blog. So this is the implementation of the blog is currently done with the bot framework. But I also have, when you start with something like this, then you generate also new ideas. And one of the ideas is really to also show the same scenario now with the Power Platform. So that you make use, or that we make use for such a scenario with all the great tooling of our low-code environment to also show that this will work also not only in a for the pro code developer, but also for the low code developer. I think that's also super important. And I know also from a number of joint customers that are looking into low code scenarios for that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Super.
Cool. Perfect.
Cool.
I think with this we're done for today. I think that was a very interesting session again. It was good to see that single sign-on is possible, that it is not so complicated once you look behind the scenes and once you understand the required token exchanges. So thank you very much for this. And Martin, I'm sure we'll see you again once you have some new fancy stuff.
Yeah.
So thank you very much.
Continue with end-to-end stories,
Yes.
Detail end-to-end stories as you are doing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me in your podcast.
Great. Yeah.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Have a nice day. See you soon.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.